So now we're going to work on machining the chassis. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put masking tape over the back of the chassis so I can label it. Makes it easier to ride on, keeps me from scratching it, just makes it a little bit easier to work with. And then I'm going to mark my center points, both left to right and top to bottom. So measure, I've got just under 5 inches. So double check that, just under 5 inches. So it's going to be 2.5 is going to be centered just above that. I don't have to be exact, but I just want some markings that I'm going to base everything on. It's there, and then left to right, do the same thing. 17 inches. And then I'm going to use the front panel that came with this chassis as a straight edge. Ruler would certainly work as well. I just had this sitting here. And then I'm just going to use these marks as a way to measure and reference things that I place on the back. So there we go. Now, the front of my chassis is here, and I've already started thinking about the layout here. I'm using this basic layout page that you've probably seen. So we're at the top, AC inlet, power transformer down here, input transformer, output transformers. We're all sitting around there. So that's how I'm going to lay them out. So when I flip this over, I want to make sure I'm thinking about how this works. This is the top, and this is the bottom. So a couple of things you want to think about. You want to think about that fact that this is the top and this is the bottom. But then you also need to think about anything we're mounting on the back. We need to think about how far it sticks in and how this is going to affect us inside. I also have my turret board that's going to sit in here, and I need to think about the space that that's going to take up. So the turret board is going to be on the bottom. It needs about 1 inch of clearance. So it's going to sit there, and I want about 1 inch from the bottom of the chassis up that I don't want to have anything sticking in because it's going to hit this turret board. So I'm going to measure for that too, just mark 1 inch. And then I want to keep most things, certainly anything that sticks through very far has to stay out of that area. So by marking it, it makes it easier to lay out the back and not have to worry about how it might mess up the front. And the other part of this I'm going to measure my turret board. So it's 10 inches long. So I know that from here to here is where the turret board is going to sit. So this is my stay out area. So on the far sides, I can go a little bit lower if I need to. Any of this you can do, and marking on your back is going to definitely help you make the whole thing work better with less redoing things. Now I'm just going to roughly place things. So I know I want my power transformer to be over here. The things I want to think about with the power transformer is if it's sitting like that, here are the 2 holes for the screws. I need to make sure that those aren't right on the edge, because if they're right on the edge, I'm not going to have room for a nut. So I want a little bit of gap. So I'm going to set it, it looks like it's about right if this top hole is on the center line. So that's where I'm going to put that. So it's going to be about there. Now for now, I'm going to turn it upside down because the wires are getting in the way, just to roughly place it. But I know that when I actually do it, I'm going to want, let's see what I can get on camera here. going to want it to sit about there with the holes on the center line. So I'm going to mark one of those. So there's that front corner of my transformer. If I do that, then my holes line up and everything should space out pretty good. I'm not doing exact alignment right now. I'm just roughly placing just to see if there's space for everything. So make sure there's space for everything. So my power transformer. And I've got my power inlet. So this one has writing on it, so I know sort of which way to make it face. Again, this is the top, so I want the writing facing upright. So that goes above the power transformer. Really good spot for it. And then coming over, the next thing we see are these two tubes. So we've got the 6 AQ5, which is, let me take out the wrapper, this 7-pin socket, the really small socket. Just going to roughly place that. I'm not at all concerned about exact placement now. I'm just sort of roughly putting them in where they go. And then I've got these two potentiometers. And it looks like before that I've got my output connector, output XLR. So I'll put that there for now. And then, oh, it looks like I put those wrong. So the 6BQ5 goes on the top and the 12AX7 on the bottom. So I got these reversed. It's easy to do that. Gotta remember this is the top and this is the bottom, and that's opposite on this drawing. And then I've got T4B. It's up here. And the next thing is the output transformer. Goes there. And T4B. And then my input XLR. And then the 12BH7 and 12AX7 down here. And then my input transformer. And you can see why I'm just roughly placing these now, because as I did that, I sort of saw how things went, and there's some things I'm probably going to play with now. Like my output XLR is way over here, and the output transformer is right here, and I think those should be closer together. There's no real reason to have them that spread out. So I'm going to swap those, move this over a bit. My input XLR can be all the way over to the side, so can the input transformer, so I'll move those over. And I'm just going to move things over to coincide with those. My T4B can be pretty close to the input XLR. The thing to think about both XLRs is that anything that sticks out far, so the T4B is still going to stick out far, this output transformer is going to stick out quite a bit. If you have that there and your XLR right next to it, it's just hard to get to the XLR. So we want to have some space there. You don't need a huge amount, but an inch or so would be useful. So if I do that, so having that XLR right in the center, that looks pretty good. Those two trimmers. So that looks pretty reasonable. Maybe spread these out a bit. Now notice it's not exactly the layout that's here. I'm trying to make it a little bit more uniform and set it up the way I want. If I move these drastically, then they're not going to line up with the components anymore, but I haven't moved them that drastically. So everything should be fine. So something like that. I tend to like things somewhat lined up, so I'm probably going to do 3 columns here and 3 columns here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to roughly mark those. So I know that these are all going to be lined up. So I'm just going to make rough marks above where they are on the top and then define them a little bit better. And I'm also going to have 2 rows. I'm going to have these going down here about that top to bottom and these about here. And all of those will line up there. So I've got just those rough marks now. It's really all I need at this point. Take all this stuff off. Now for all of these things except really the power inlet, they all need round, just circular holes. If I were to just draw that hole on here, I might do that just to show how everything's going to fit. But instead I did it by lining everything up. But what I need to be able to machine it is just an X right at the center of that hole. That's where my drill bit will go. That's all I really need to find out. So I'm going to want to make X's. So I'm going to draw all these lines in, and then from that I'll make the X's. So first off is this line that's going to show left to right where all of the stuff on the top is going to position. And I'm going to measure from my center line, and this is why I put the center line in. to that point. So we've got 1 1/8. So I'll mark it down here. Try to make it where you can see. 1 1/8. I'm not being incredibly precise, but I'm trying to be pretty precise. This is all really just visual. It's not going to make a huge difference in how anything works. So, and then 3/4 inch from there. And again, using my straight edge that came with it. Now I'm probably not going to end up using this front panel. I'm probably going to have one manufactured. But if I was, I might be a little gentle with this. But I would probably repaint it anyway. And then I just want to go with these lines. And again, I want to measure from the center. And I'm going to take them from where I've got them marked to what's the next standard measurement. So 2.5 inches from the center for this first one. And that's going to be my output transformer. And then down below, it's going to be the 12BH7. So I'm going to put trans, mark that with TX. And this is BH7. Just so I remember what I'm putting there and I'll know what size to mark it, the whole. And then this one is, the next one is right around 5. I'm going to go ahead and make it 5. Can I roughly place them so I can move them a little bit just to make the dimensions come out even. And then the next one for my XLR is at 7.5. And then that will also be the transformer, the input transformer. Now the input transformer is a little different. It has 2 screws that mount it, and then leave a hole for this wire to come through. And all of those will line up on that line that I just made. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that with a straight edge, and this time using my turret board. So line up along those 2 markings. And then later on, when I'm ready to measure the distance between those 2, I'll mark that there, and then also put a hole here for the wires to flow through. So again, that's a TX. This is an N XLR. My out XLR is right here. And then this is the T4B. This is the AX7, 12AX7. So that's this side. And then over on this side, we have some more to measure. So we have the 2 potentiometers and then the 2 tubes. So the 2 tubes are right here at 4 inches. So I'll mark those. And that is the AX7 on the bottom and the AQ5 on the top. And then my potentiometer is in the middle of that. It looks like I didn't actually make a little mark for them, so I'll just go halfway, mark them at 2 inches. And since I didn't mark that, I'm just going to double check that that looks right to me. There's my XLR, X7, AQ5, that. Yeah, that all looks good. And then I also wanted these holes and this guy. So this inlet, power inlet, is a complex shape. So it's mostly a rectangle, but then these 2 sides are angled. So I'll show you in the next, I'll show you in a bit how I line that up and mark it on here. So that's going to be, I'm going to draw the exact shape I want to cut, and then that's going to be a harder thing to cut. All of these are just going to be circles. They're going to be holes that we drill. Since I've marked what it is, I'll be able to measure what the size is for each component that I need to put in as I need to put it in. So now let's go ahead and mark these holes. So to do this, I'm going to use a caliper. So I have a fancy digital one, but you can use a standard one as well. This is what a standard one looks like. This is kind of a rusty one, but it still works. You see a measurement up here, and you can adjust it. One trick for using So now I'm going to work on this guy, which is a little oddball shaped. So I'm going to go ahead and measure it both directions. So I'll measure left to right first. So it's basically 1 inch. And I want to center it the same as this transformer, which is 6 3/4. So I'll mark a center line for that. 6 3/4. And then go 1 inch on either side of that. So 1 inch around that, sorry, so 1/2 inch on either side of that. I'll mark. And then I'll go ahead and bring those marks down here because I already have that. And that'll give me my lines for left and right sides. And then top to bottom, I'm going to want it to set. So my transformer, which is in its place, goes up to about here. So sort of mark that. So I need to be above that. So my center is going to be around in here. And that is, you can't see that. So that's 1 3/4 inches from my center line. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that again on both of these lines. So that's my center point. And then this from top to bottom is 1.25, so 1 1/4 inches. So that'll mean I'll want to go up 5/8 of an inch. Again, you can't see that, so let me try it from here. That looks a little tight. Yeah, that's a little tight. I need to go a little bit lower. I made it a bit too high. So I need to go back to like there. Let's see what that is. So let's say 1.5 inches instead. And this is why it's great to have this tape on here so you can erase and make new marks and everything you need to do. So then I'll need to go 5/8 of an inch above and below that. Five-eighths right there. And then that. Make sure I'm on the right line. There's my center. Five-eighths. Then I'll draw between those. And I'm not being incredibly accurate, but I'm trying to get close. So my markings feel a little bit off. And I'll sort of set that in to make sure it looks like it's going to work. Yep, that's going to work. Now, it has these two corners on it. So I'm going to measure how big that is in the middle. So it's 1/2 inch. So I want to go 1/4 inch from the center of this. So I'm going to start by marking center. It's 1 inch. Mark center. And then I want 1/4 inch to either side. And then from the bottom, that curve starts at basically 1 inch. So I'm going to measure 1 inch from the bottom. Just right there. Mark those. So it's not much of a corner we're cutting out, but it's a little bit of one, and this will make it worthwhile. So that should fit in there now if we cut all this out. Now all of these extra holes on the sides for mounting things that this has and the tube sockets have, we're going to wait on those until the main hole is cut. We'll set this down in place, and then we'll mark our new holes for the sides. That's the most accurate and easy way to do that. So that's all laid out now and ready to drill. So now that we've got all our markings, it's time to get ready to drill. So the first thing we need to do is make a little dent at each of our center points. If we don't do that, then the drill bit's going to dance around a bit and not exactly where we want it to be. So a couple things I've done. I put a piece of wood I don't care about down on the table so I don't drill through the table if I happen to do that. And then I have a center punch. This is a spring-loaded center punch. You push down and the spring releases and you get an extra little bit of force. You can also find the kind that just hammer in. This is the kind I prefer. So we'll start with the input XLR here. Just go down exactly where I want it and just press. This is heavy steel, so I'll do it a couple times, make sure I've got a nice dent. Now for this almost square-shaped hole, I'm not going to do anything right now. So I'm just marking the round hole centers. So now I just want to drill in those holes I've made. So I'm starting off with a small pilot hole drill bit. I'm going to end up using step bits, which look like this. But they're not great at starting a hole, so I like to start a hole with something smaller first. So this is just a standard drill bit. Make sure you get it right in that hole, the dent you made. And with drilling in metal, one of the things you want to make sure of is you don't go too fast. So I'm going to go not at the fastest setting of my drill, but probably, this has 2 speeds. This is a really inexpensive drill. We'll see if it works. So I'm going to go at the slow speed, which might seem kind of frustrating, but what happens if you go too fast? So this is steel. The faster you go, the more heat you build up. And when you build up heat and you heat steel, it gets harder. So that's going to make it harder to drill. So we want to keep it going fairly slow. And what I want to see are ribbons of metal coming out. That'll tell me I'm going about the right speed. So let's try it. So there, that little ribbon of metal, that's what you want to see. I didn't mention this, but I've got a clamp holding my chassis down to this table, so it's not going to move around. You can also put in a vise if you have a vise easily available. So I'm going to do one of these holes so you can see a little bit better on camera. Now the hole I just drilled was for the 6 AQ5, which has a 7-pin socket that looks like this. The part that's going to go in is this bottom area. So here's just this inexpensive caliper. And I want to measure the size I need that hole to be. So at least that big. Then I'm going to go to my bits that I'm going to use. And let's go ahead and go to the bigger one. So I want to go to the 5/8 inch mark. You can see that. So there are 2 left at the top when I get as big as I need to go. So I'll put this in my drill. Now the drill I'm using is a pretty inexpensive one. It just happens to be what I have at the desk where I have my camera set up. So I have better ones I would typically use for this. So I'm just going to hope it works out okay. But this shows this. If it works, I'll show you how inexpensive. I think this is like a $20 drill. Nothing really expensive. So the way this step bit works is there are 2 cutting points, one on this side, one on the opposite side, and it'll cut in steps. So as you get through each one, it'll stop cutting for a while and start cutting again. So it bounces down. So it's a little different than a normal drill bit. But for metal, they make really clean holes. Now, I know I wanted to leave the last 2 steps not done, so I've got one more to go before I'm there, but I always like to check it before I get close, just to make sure I'm not going too far. So that's still not big enough, so I'll do one more. Now I'll check it. So that's actually still too tight. It still won't fit in. So I'm going to go one more. That's close. This tape is starting to sort of get in the way, so I want to make sure I pull it out of the way, because I want to make sure that's not what's keeping it from being big enough. And that was. So that's a perfect fit now. I always keep my parts around so that I know for sure that the holes I'm cutting will fit. So that's the process for all of these round holes. Just go ahead and do that for all of them. And then in the next video, I'll talk about doing these square holes.